It's time to bring you the feature on the show today as reactions continue to trail the petrol and electricity tariff hike in the country. President Muhammadu Buhari earlier this week on Monday for the first time personally defended the recent hike in price of fuel and electricity. President Buhari during the interministerial meeting said this in response to the impact of COVID-19 which had affected economies globally and compelled his administration to make some necessary far-reaching adjustments for long-term gains with some initial pain. Shortly after the meeting, the Minister of Information and Culture, Alai Mohammed, held a joint press conference to address the outcry of Nigerians over the increase in the pump price of fuel and electricity tariff. He says subsidizing fuel of petrol in Nigeria is no longer is not visible as the cost has become too expensive and unsustainable for government. We have details in this report.
Barely a week ago, the federal government announced a fresh increase in petroleum pump price and electricity tariff. As expected, this brought about a public outcry from Nigerians who believe the increase is insensitive and ill-timed. The federal government says the hike is as a result of the increase in crude oil market prices and describes complaints from unsatisfied Nigerians as mischievous and unnecessary. It says due to the current economic realities, fuel subsidy has become too expensive for the government to sustain and may no longer be feasible in the long run.
Government can no longer afford to subsidize petrol prices because of its mainly negative consequences. This includes a return to the cost subsidy regime. With 60% less revenues today, we cannot afford the cost.
One of the problems successive governments have been trying to handle is this issue of subsidy. If every government has been trying to achieve this, then you know that it is in the national interest for us to achieve it.
The federal government says it has spent about 1.7 trillion naira in supplementing electricity tariff shortfalls and lacks the resources to continue to shoulder such expenses. But it says only those who enjoy a minimum of 12 hours of electricity will have their tariffs adjusted, while those with lesser hours of power supply will experience no increase.
The government has also noted the complaints about arbitrarily estimated billing. Accordingly, a mass metering program is being undertaken to provide meters for over 5 million Nigerians, largely driven by preferred procurement from local manufacturers and creating thousands of jobs in the process.
The government says the adjustment in the power and petroleum sector is merely coincidental and says Nigerians still pay less when compared to other African countries.
Now, the federal government maintains there is no going back on the removal of subsidies, stating that in the last 14 years, a sum of 10.4 trillion naira has been spent on subsidy regime. It says any form of subsidy that has been draining government coffers has been stopped, including tariff on electricity, which also hit 1.7 trillion naira. To deliberate more on the recent increments and the energy sector pricing model, evaluating the impact of fuel price hike and electricity tariff increase on MSMEs and households, I have joining me the former Director General of the Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Dr. Chijioke Ikechukwu. Thank you very much, Dr. Ikechukwu, for your time.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
We have seen the federal government come out boldly to defend the recent hike. We've seen issues, we've seen a lot of reference and saying that this is the way to go. They say this is necessary for long-term gains. Now, it's like government summoned the courage to actually remove subsidy on PMS. Now, let's start this way. How does this move come to you?
Sometime last year, you will recall that the finance minister mentioned that government will no longer embark on any kind of subsidy. Nigerians applauded her, but at that time, many Nigerians didn't know the implications of what she was saying. What that meant was that the prices of fuel and petroleum products will be determined by forces of demand and supply. And that was just what she meant. That meant that at any point the international crude oil price rose up. Of course, at that time, prices of petroleum products in Nigeria would just rise up or two. And of course, today, you know, that reality has come to face Nigerians. Government of Nigeria obviously are the biggest beneficiaries of this kind of policy, but the citizens of Nigeria are the worst hit of this particular policy. It is so because inflation rate is hitting every part of the economy, and of course, quality of life is dropping. The standard of living of average Nigerian is dropping. You have money in the bank today, you think that money has some value. Inflation rate obviously will just take it away. And so, what it means is that Nigerians are going to continue to live up to this, to the extent that if the petroleum price continues to rise, of course, we'll continue to pay high for it. If the exchange rate continues to rise, we'll continue to pay high for it. And so, until the international crude oil price drops or exchange rate drops drastically, Nigerians may not experience any kind of drop in the fuel price that we are seeing today, pump price we are seeing today. So that is just what it is. Nigerians are going to be facing the realities of the demand and supply of these products.
Reality. So this is real, and we have to just face it head on. Economic sustainability plan is somewhere. We know about that document, beautiful document. It says solar system will be moved to 5 million homes, financing support for manufacturers through the CBN, provision of mini grids. A lot is expected with this document. Now, let's not look at the effect of this on the entire business environment. We know what business owners have been complaining. They've been talking about already tariffs, levies, and all of that. Now that we have this move, what effect do you see it having on the business environment?
Unfortunately, one side of government, probably the monetary policy controlled by the CBN, is making every effort to ensure that the average businessman survives in his business. And of course, coupled with the fact that you know the effect of COVID-19 in the last few months. An average businessman, especially the MSME, is suffering all these devastations coming from harsh economic situation. Yet, the issue of hike in electricity tariff and increase in fuel price came at the same time to hit an average SME. Of course, the implications are clear. The implication is the fact that an average businessman may have to shut down. And MSMEs that are struggling to put their businesses together may be forced to shut down because they wouldn't be able to cope with the cost of doing the business they already started doing. That is just the reality for today. And it's unfortunate that all these things are happening around the same time. It's a coincidence, but of course it's also a coincidence coming from the fact that our revenue base as a country, just like the minister said, reduced by 60%. And so if it did, Nigeria will want to do everything to just reduce the burden on itself in order to even be able to pay the obligations of the country. You know, so to say subsidy will continue in both electricity and in petroleum products, it is not possible for the country, as a country, to be able to carry such burden right now. It is not possible because that would just be a lot of burden to be carried. To talk about the 1.7 trillion subsidy that's already existing in electricity, it's not something the federal government can carry today. Our debt burden is about 31 trillion. That is just like 3 times our budget, our annual budget. You know, so if your debt burden is 3 times your annual budget, you can imagine that we are just not economically stable, to say the least.
I'm just thinking, before I go to my next question, do you think Nigerians are really so enlightened or educated with regards to all of these issues? Because I thought about this myself yesterday. 31 trillion naira debt, our budget is run about 10 trillion. So we already have a debt of like 3 times. So what do you think government should do in making Nigerians understand the reality on ground that this is really not sustainable? I don't think everybody is really getting to understand this. When I mean everybody, I mean Nigerians in general.
Yeah, unfortunately, the major stakeholders, the trade unions, the average Nigerian was not well sensitized before these whole decisions were taken. And of course, you know, Nigerian, whatever that is not discussed, when there's a breakdown in communication, you just know that what can lead to is the kind of demonstrations we are seeing today all over the country, and or the kind of threats to demonstration we are seeing all over the country. So, but I don't think it is late right now for sensitization process to start, so that all the major stakeholders, the organized private sector and other trade union groups should be carried along so that they will understand it from the economic standpoint, not from labor standpoint, because if it has to be made known to them from the economic standpoint, then they should be able to understand it. Otherwise, they will only think it is just the insensitivity of government to actually allow these prices to increase. So that sensitivity and that sensitivity process has to take place right now, and it is not late for them to start now.
Great. That sounds better now. The president also inaugurated a new committee to lead Nigeria's new development plan. Yesterday, I saw the likes of Atedo Peterside. I saw the guys, the players in the industry. Now, of what essence is this to the present state of issues bedeviling the country? We know we have COVID-19. You identified that, supply disruption that has affected businesses, trade wars, and all of this. So what do you expect from this new committee?
Well, seeing that committee, you know that that was assemblage of core economic and financial professionals. You also know that in the past, such kind of professionals have been assembled before, and probably their reports were made and all those reports dumped. It is one thing to put together a committee that will take certain decisions or make recommendations, and another thing to not politicize the kind of recommendations made by this particular committee. So what government needs to do is, to the extent that they have put this committee together, to that extent, they have to take everything they are recommending hook, line, and sinker, because these are professionals who have been put together to help solve the economic issues of the country. But that does not mean that putting the committee together will actually increase the revenue base of the country, which is 90% coming from oil, and we already know what the oil position is today, oil price position is today. But to the extent that they have been put together, to that extent they should be allowed to do their work, and the government should listen to them and take their recommendations seriously.
Dr. Kechuku, let's now look at this other issue that also comes to my mind. Borders remain closed, and we've seen some issues with neighboring countries, even like Ghana, when you see trade issues, business issues, talks about taxes and levies. The story seems to be the same almost everywhere. Now, let's now look at post-COVID-19, moving on. What kind of recovery are you prospecting for a country like Nigeria, looking at all of these challenges head on?
Well, you also know that every country of the world is suffering the effect of COVID-19. Very developed countries are already suffering it, and many of them are already in recession. And so it is not only a problem peculiar with Nigeria. And so we have to keep easing the economy. When we keep easing the economy, the effect of the lockdown will be reduced. Unfortunately, we already have a mainstay, which is the oil revenue, and which is heavily threatened at this stage. If we had other sectors of the economy doing well, if we had states of this country, different states, we have 39 states, if we had different states doing very well with their various agricultural products or various solid minerals or various opportunities that God gave them, there will be less dependence on this oil that is actually the mainstay for Nigeria. So if that had happened, what would have been facing today would just be states and all the indigenes of various states doing very well, and of course passing same to some revenue to the federal government. But our system is not structured like that. So going forward, really, those are the things we have to be looking at to see how we have to decentralize what we're having today in order for the economic base and the economic revenue of the country being concentrated. We call it concentration risk, and we know that concentration risk remains there, but the mitigants are always being mentioned all the time. Nobody's putting any effort together to ensure that we use the mitigants to mitigate against the problems that we're having. So the states should actually be part of economic growth, and if they all do so, a little pressure, just only a little pressure, will be on the federal government.
And at the end of the day, there should be light at the end of the tunnel. Dr. Ikechukwu, I must thank you very much for your time. He's the former Director General of Abuja Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Thank you very much for spending your afternoon with us on Business Nigeria today.